Good morning, everybody. We'll begin very shortly. I'll just take a couple of moments while everybody joins the call. Great. So good morning, everybody. I think we've still got people joining the call, but in the interest of time, I'm going to slowly kick off. So welcome to today's, we've called it webinar, but it's not really a webinar. It's more a conversation about a very exciting competition that has been launched with Global Government Forum and the Knowledge Partner here today with us, Mastercard. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former civil servant here in the UK, and I'll just be helping to steer us through the conversation today. But as I said, today we are going to be talking about a really exciting competition that was actually launched a couple of weeks ago at an event that we held in London, which was the Public Service Data.ai event. But we're going to be giving all of that information again today because we know there are people interested in this competition. And it's all about kind of using data that Mastercard collect to help policymakers to kind of influence some of their policy decisions. I'm joined by two colleagues from Mastercard who will be in a moment. I'm going to be introducing them. They'll be talking you through exactly kind of the data that they hold and what this competition is all about and how you as policymakers could get involved in this competition. We want to make this as interactive as possible, so we've got about 45 minutes here today. Please, anywhere on your screen, you should see somewhere on your screen, there's a Q&A function. So at any moment, don't wait until the presentation is over. If a question or a comment comes to your mind, as we are going through the presentation, please use that Q&A function to message in your question and your comment. And if I think it's relevant and we need to kind of answer that question, we will do it immediately. If not, once you've heard the presentation, then we will get through all of those questions. But please do get your questions coming in because this is your opportunity to really find out how you might be able to enter this competition and get access to all of this wonderful data. Obviously, data being so crucial to driving some of those policy decisions. And I do lots of events with Global Government Forum about data. And one of the biggest frustrations that I hear from policymakers is they don't have access to the quality data that they need for some of those decisions and policy development that they are working on. So what I'm going to do for the next kind of 20 minutes or so, I'm going to hand over to two of our fantastic colleagues from Mastercard. So we have with us here today Thomas Green, who is Managing Consultant for Mastercard, and Simon Wright-Lakin, who is Vice President of Public Sector Europe Solutions and Outreach for Mastercard. And I'm just going to invite Simon and Thomas to give us a bit more information about the competition. And then, as I say, message in your questions while they're talking, but at the end of that presentation, we will have time for you to put any of the questions that you have to Simon and Thomas about how you might be able to get involved in this competition. So, Simon, Thomas, I'm going to come over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you everybody for joining. Just to echo what Siobhan said, please kind of questions. It would be great to receive your questions. Me and Tom would really enjoy that. As Siobhan said, I'm work at Mastercard in our public sector team and looking forward to sharing a bit more about our data in this competition. And I'll be getting into a bit of that detail. Also, just want to thank our friends at Global Governance Forum for supporting us today, but actually supporting through this whole process. And I know, as Siobhan was saying, kind of the whole team's a big believer in that sort of data and the relevance of it. So thank you very much. Just before I start, Tom, did you want to say hi and introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So it's really great to speak with everyone today, and I guess thank you for the time to join. We're really excited about the competition in partnership with the Global Government Forum team, and hopefully today, with a few case studies, kind of highlight some of the ways that our data can be used to understand the impact of various events, and kind of bringing that together with policy as well. And just kind of echoing the comments from Siobhan, we have some slides today that we'll talk through, which will shed a bit more light on the competition and our data. But we really would be interested in hearing from you about the questions, obviously the remit that we have within our data, what we can answer, and your thoughts more broadly on the competition and on that data as well. So do reach out to us if you have any questions as we go through. Very happy for it to be a conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And on that note, Simon and Tom, just before you kick off, we've already got a question coming in, and I think this is exactly the kind of thing people will be wanting to know. So Hamid has said, where is the location of data that you're providing? So you, I imagine, will be covering all of those kind of issues in your presentation.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it will certainly be addressed during the presentation. But if there's any other follow-up ones, yeah, please ask away.
Fantastic.
Perfect. Right. I'm just going to share my screen. Always a fun moment, just to make sure that's sharing correctly. And share. Siobhan, can you see my screen okay?
I can. That's fantastic. Thanks, Simon. That's looking great.
Perfect. So just before we get into the slides, I'm just going to set the scene a bit about Mastercard data. And to help me do that, to tell a story, I actually had a quick question for you, Siobhan. Are you a Swiftie at all, Siobhan? Are you a Taylor Swift fan?
I think I'm a bit too old to be a full-on Swiftie, but I do like a bit of Taylor Swift, yeah.
Okay. And some of my colleagues have heard this story before, so apologies if others have as well. But it's just a really important sort of example of something very specific, an event, a Taylor Swift concert. And we can see how a Taylor Swift concert affects local spending, local economy. We could see in a 2.5 mile radius around a Taylor Swift concert in the UK, how there can be a 67% increase in restaurant spend. We can see how that varies by a 2.5 mile radius to a 5 to a 10 mile radius. What areas of a city does it help and support? Changes in hotel bookings, where people have come from for different concerts. When we did some analysis, it was interesting to see a lot of US citizens coming to Europe to watch a Taylor Swift concert because it was cheaper to do that than watch it in the US. So you start to get a sense of if a Taylor Swift concert actually drives tourism and the different businesses it supports. When you really then sort of take that notion and take that idea and start thinking about it more, what that could mean, as you said earlier, Siobhan, for kind of evidence-based policy making, we can see that for an event like a Taylor Swift concert or changes in behavior linked to a Commonwealth Games. We've done some work before with Liverpool University to look at the impact of Eurovision and our spending sort of behaviors there. But not only around events, you just see that around the whole country, around the whole city, around all cities, around different areas. And Tom's going to talk through a bit more of the science almost of actually what sort of level of data we can get down to, seeing all the different types of spend, the types of stores that spend might happen at. Again, whether they're an international card, so you can identify tourism. Is it a commercial card, so it's spend for business? We process $7.8 trillion of transactions globally. We've got 3 billion cardholders globally. So that gives us a massive insight as in kind of different behaviors. And then with our knowledge, we can create indexes and above there, so it's not just MasterCard, but all spend in different areas. So you can start to think about policy impacts, maybe forecasting revenue collections by HMRC, which industries are doing well, which are down. Is there differences in a high street, changing spending patterns? We were speaking to an MP for a city and they asked our help to help them understand, has the high street become more of a leisure destination than a shopping destination? Because actually we know there's change of retail parks, etc. And they've seen more coffee shops, music venues, restaurants. And actually for their seaside town, it's been less about retail and more about leisure and that evolving high street. So there's many different kind of elements and aspects of that data and how we can look at economic behavior, spending patterns, impacts of events, whether they be pandemic, social events, leisure activities, different changes in policy that might lead to behaviors. So there's a ton of different sort of analysis we can do on that. And we want to get some involvement from you guys on the call. And again, thank you very much for joining. Hopefully you'll find this interesting to actually how you could use some of that data for the areas that you work in, and where we want to accept these proposals to try and give then some access to our data through this competition. Pulse, policy making using local spending evidence, how we can use that spending evidence to support events. So I'm going to now slowly go into a little bit more detail of what the event is, the competition, how it works, and then Tom's going to get into a bit more of the detail of the data. That question earlier, like, where is the data held? What actually is the data? Because it can always be on people's minds, I want to call out very, very early on, it's anonymized data. Tom will repeat this later because it's an important message. MasterCard doesn't see that it's Simon, that it's Tom, that it's Siobhan. We see lines of transactions. It's anonymized, and again Tom will go through it that in detail, but it's just really important to call that out, that we're not analyzing individual people's spend. We're analyzing a mass of transactions that allow different views. So the goal of this competition is to maybe spark innovative, actionable ideas that might help economic growth, urban resilience, think about financial inclusion, maybe public services. So there was a number of suggested themes that we were looking at here. Doesn't have to be one of these themes. These are suggestions. There can be many different applications to the data. But, is it thinking about that inclusive growth? Where are there more deprived areas of a city? How does behavior there vary than somewhere else? We hear stories of maybe in more deprived areas of the city, certain retailers in groceries moving out, fast food moving in. What does that have as an impact on local societies, local communities? That more urban resilience. We've done lots of different work globally with different cities thinking about urban resilience. That everybody's favorite topic that had such an impact on our lives with COVID. The urban resilience has changed. Spend and travel into cities is different. For those of us in London, we do see that it's more spread out rather than a kind of peak up to a Thursday and then sort of quieten again, more working from home. But how has that then changed that people have moved out the cities, don't spend in the cities in the same way? I've mentioned tourism culture a bit, so those sort of themes that could come out. Sustainability is a really popular one around this data. We can see an event, we can see how people travel to it, we can see how people behave around it. Were public transit being used, different mechanisms being used to get there? What's the impact on sustainability and the number of people moving there? Has it created cross-border tourism that can have a positivity around kind of economy, but does that also have an impact sustainability? And SME, small business, core to government strategy, core to economy. How can that data sort of help around that? Again, only suggested themes, doesn't have to be that. And then you might want to think about, what you're going to do with that data. When we're evaluating any submissions, and the next slide will be that process for submissions, the sort of things that we'll be looking at as a panel of different people will be policy relevance, level of innovation, the general feasibility, the levels of social impact that it's having, and almost that view of the methodology and the scalability. How could that continue to be used? And I challenge people to sort of think about what sort of outputs they might have from this data. Is it to drive dashboards and different tools? Is it to write specific research papers? Maybe you want to test a policy, do a pilot, do a change, thinking about the impacts that could have. How do you support more local borough communities to have a local market, and how that might help a local community? Does it drive different levels of public-private collaboration? That's always been an interesting one. Certain different, again, maybe I've seen it quite often in seaside towns that maybe want investment, how this data could be used in that public sector setting to actually show that maybe there's a lack of hotels, different infrastructure, etc., proving that to drive private collaboration. And growth strategies. We know that's all very important and key to the government, how we can drive more growth, how we can drive more revenue for the country, how we can then drive more collections in taxes to invest in society, to avoid the need to lift taxes, to drive different sort of behaviors in that way. So all those general growth strategies for the market, for the country, but also, again, maybe different cities, boroughs, councils will have different thoughts there. So yeah, I hope that helps just sort of bring it to life. Maybe sort of things that you might be thinking about around that data. One thing I want to mention, because we've had a question on it in the past, not on this slide, is who is this open to? Public sector. We've mentioned, of course, government and government areas, government entities, government departments, but public sector as well, whether that be more universities working in those research spaces. It can, of course, be local government. It sounds a bit of a simple way to say it, but I'd probably say anything that's not the private sector. Anything where there's that public sector and it's for a drive of good for societies, for communities, we're really interested in hearing about.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon. I just wanted to come in before you move on. So what you're saying about universities and academics, I worked with Warwick University for a little while, and I know academics would love this kind of data, access this kind of data. So one thing that might be interesting is civil servants partnering up with academics on an idea, for example.
Yeah.
That would work, would it, from your perspective?
Absolutely. The next slide, Siobhan's going to go through a little bit kind of steps and rules, but we don't want to be too ball driven. I think if there's how a civil servant could work with a university to drive that research paper that could drive policy decisions, sounds amazing. Yeah, that would be perfect, those kind of collaborations.
Great.
So yeah, let me get into a little bit more detail then on the format. So we've actually already kind of launched, as it was mentioned at the beginning, we launched this last week at Global Government Forum's event, Public Service Data Live AI. So at the end of this, but you'll have already seen this on the website for how you've got to this webinar, there's links of where to go to sort of enter. So that application is open. It's a very simple application. We did not want to put in many different bars to entry. So it is more contact details, simple sort of things, and the departments that you might work in. Picking kind of a theme that maybe this is around, and simple kind of descriptions around it. It is not over-engineered. Again, we did not want to put blockers in there. So please go to there and look at that application sort of process. From that, what we actually want to do is then pick 5 shortlisted finalists. So we're going to go through that, sift through them, find 5 finalists to move forward, that we're then actually going to set up again with help from our friends with Global Governments Forum, an almost Dragon Den style panel, a mixture of different people from government and people that work in this space, somebody from MasterCard as well, about 5 or so as a sort of panel to pick an overall winner. We then actually announce that winner in November. We'd like to invite all of those finalists to our office in London to almost present and share their cases, because those finalists will have created great use cases, and it's important to kind of share them and put them on a give them that chance to kind of share what they've done before we actually announce a winner on that day at the event. I missed an important bit actually. Those 5 finalists, those 5 shortlisted finalists, they would get access then to our data to kind of fine tune and think about their pitches. So they would actually get access to MasterCard tools. Again, Tom's going to talk about what they are and that question earlier about where is the data, but they'd actually get access to our tools for a few weeks. Tom and I would be on hand to help and support people through that sort of process, to almost again fine tune their submissions.
So Simon, just on that, sorry, so we got a question in from Phil who has said, so to be clear, only one project goes forward from all the entrants, but what you're saying is the 5 shortlisted entrants would get access to your data and would get support to take that idea forward.
Yes,
Brilliant.
yes, absolutely. And then if I just make this appear, the overall finalist would win and receive 12 months access free to the MasterCard data tools that Tom's going to discuss in a bit. So yeah, exactly as you just described, Siobhan, simple application, selecting 5 finalists, giving them access for a few weeks to fine tune their offering, again with the support of ourselves if that's indeed wanted, before then kind of going through that panel and then announcing the overall winner, who would receive access to the MasterCard data tools for their department, for their area of work.
Wow.
So I'm going to move on and just hand over to Tom. But Siobhan, is there anything else there? Do you think that was clear, that process?
Yeah, no, I think that's really clear. And obviously, there'll be other ways if people throughout this process realize that this is going to be beneficial for them, then they can have a conversation with MasterCard going forward.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can reach out via Global Governance Forum.
Yeah.
We'll try and connect with the group on the call, so got contact details. Yes, it's partnership, collaboration, support are all the keywords, Siobhan. Yeah, it's not cold. You're absolutely right.
Brilliant. Thanks.
So Tom, I'm going to hand over to you because you're going to talk a little bit more about what's actually in the data, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. So yeah, thank you, Simon. And maybe just a little bit of conscious of time, Simon, if we can just kind of, I guess, forward the animations just to the end of this slide, so we've got all of the detail on here. So yeah, thank you everyone again for joining. I suppose a bit of a background about myself. Been with MasterCard for 5.5 years, and I have the pleasure of working, pretty much day in, day out with our public sector clients, both here in the UK and in Ireland, about how they make practical use of our various data assets and our data platforms. Now, one of the kind of core questions fundamentally, right, is understanding MasterCard, when a transaction takes place, what do you actually see? Because that then drives the fundamental data that can be analyzed, the insights that can be generated, and then the decisions that can be supported on the back end as well. So what we have here on the slide is a view into the detail that's collected whenever a transaction on a MasterCard card is made anywhere around the world. Now, a very, very important point is that the data that we see here, this isn't something that we're including within that transaction message to enable us to deliver insights projects like this. These are the core metrics that we need our global transaction network to run effectively, and we very much adhere to the idea of data minimization, so we're not unduly collecting data that doesn't have a core purpose, but these metrics are really important to us to enable those transactions to go through and our global network to run as efficiently and as effectively as it does. Now, that being said, what do we actually see when a transaction takes place? So kind of walking through left to right, as you might expect, we see the date and time of every single transaction that is made on a MasterCard card. So, for those that maybe headed into the office this morning and grabbed a coffee on your way there, starting on the left-hand side, we'd be able to segment that by that transaction into times of the day. So we would be able to see those morning cups of coffee. We'd be able to see those, sandwiches bought on a lunch break, or anything that's that's happening maybe in the evening. So we can start to segment the day to understand what happens throughout that time period. And obviously, as we aggregate that together, we can get insights into days of the week. So on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, what might be happening after work on a Thursday, for instance, versus what's happening on the weekend. So we can start to build up those segmentations. And I think a really exciting thing about our data set is we have a long set of historic transaction data that we can refer back to, going back beyond COVID. So enabling those comparisons of what happened over a historic period is kind of right at our fingertips, pretty much. Now, we've highlighted it in orange because it's really a really important point. Simon alluded to this earlier, is that we on the MasterCard side, all of our transaction data is fully aggregated and anonymized. What that means at the transaction level, which we're looking at here, is that when we're thinking about identifying the card that makes the transaction, the only way that we can essentially link that and look into the transaction is based off an anonymized version, so a hashed version of the 16-digit, so the long card number that sits on that card. And what that means is we don't have any access as MasterCard to any of the personal identifiable information about that card holder. So the name, the address, the gender, anything like that, that information sits purely with the bank that issued that card. All we see is the anonymized account number. But that anonymized account number is consistent and consistently linked to that individual card. So what we can start to do here is through predictive models, we can start to make informed assumptions, models, predictions about that particular card holder. So one of the ways this insight or this data is used, for instance, is to build out a predictive model on the residential location of cardholders. Now, we never do this down to an individual level, it's all aggregated, but what that might enable you to do, for instance, is if you were thinking of, say, looking at, who's coming to spend on Oxford Street, for instance, maybe in the run up to Christmas, we can look at what are the top origination postcodes from the rest of the country, from the rest of the UK, or from central London, from outer London. Where are on aggregate people coming from when they spend in a particular destination? And the way that we do that is kind of by these predictive models off the anonymized account number there. But again, highlighting that anonymization piece is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
On the card type, as you might assume, that morning coffee, for instance, we can see whether that's a credit or a debit card that's issued to you and I just as a consumer. But we are able to also look at that in terms of commercial cards as well. So if you're on a business trip, for instance, and that was a corporate expense done on a corporate card, we could segment that as well. So you can start to look at consumer versus business spend quite readily within the transaction data as well. Really important point. Obviously, a lot of the work we do in the public sector has that geospatial angle to it, understanding around place, the impact that has, retail, the health of high streets is a big topic. We know here in the UK. So being able to accurately map the location of merchants is kind of fundamental to this. So kind of coming back to that morning coffee, what we'll understand is the name of that, where that transaction takes place, so that the merchant will have the full address, and then we'll have the latitude and longitude, so the GPS coordinate essentially for that individual merchant. That's captured when the merchant signs up to be able to process transactions on our network. And then what that allows us to do, and this is really important for the data that will be provided in the competition, is then map that out on a geospatial basis. And we can do this down in the UK, which, to address the question from earlier, is the geographic scope of the competition. We can do that down to a height, to an individual street level. So in the UK, we can narrow that down to a series of 150-meter grids everywhere across the UK from a merchant perspective. So kind of
just on that, Thomas, just to be clear on that first question that we had, the location of the data, if the winning entry, for example, was something to do with civil servants working with a local authority, say with Birmingham City
Yeah,
Council, you could provide data that was relevant
yeah,
for
yeah. So the
a
idea
specific
here would be to
area.
provide, yeah, for the
Yeah.
entirety of the UK.
Okay.
Um,
Fantastic.
I guess counterintuitively, as you might think, it's actually, you know, slightly easier for us on a data delivery perspective to provide for a wider geography
Yeah.
than for a more narrow geography. So, you know, our starting point would be for the entirety of the UK, but you know, that's probably something we'll work through with those that put in bids as to the right
Yeah.
scope. But yeah, totally.
Okay.
The total availability of the data, you know, we didn't want just to limit that to a particular area, and so would be available for the entirety of the
Okay.
UK.
Brilliant.
What I'll do is I kind of talk quickly, run to the rest of these and kind of bring it to life with a few examples. But we take the merchant information, we can start to then aggregate that by the types of industry. So, you know, for that coffee shop, you have that idea into kind of general restaurant spending. If you wanted to look at apparel retail, if you wanted to look at spend on fuel, on the transport as well, you know, we can break that down into different industries. So giving those, working with the data, that evaluation piece into how different sectors of the economy are performing. I think a really important point as well is we can segment the transactions by the channel. So for instance, if this is an in-person transaction, we can look at that. Equally, we can look at whether that transaction is taking place online. So for instance, we know that those in the public sector, you know, some people are using that, for instance, to look at the evolution of consumer preferences as it relates to you know, fast food spending, basically. So people looking at, are people going in and you know, visiting restaurants in person, or are they relying more on the kind of delivery platforms, for instance? And we can provide that data by looking at this online versus a kind of offline split, if you wanted to kind of look at it that way. Now, in terms of the types of transactions, you know, it's really the main purchases that I think that would be of most relevance here. But we do have insights into, for instance, returns, you know, how people may be taking cash out at ATMs as well. And I think a really interesting point, and this is going to be available within the data for the competition as well, is some of our additional transaction flags. And a key one here is it relates to domestic versus international transactions. So we can see, for instance, a card issued here, you know, potentially someone like NatWest here in the UK transacting at a UK merchant. We can flag that as a domestic transaction. Now, if this was a card that was issued in the US and now was transacting in you know, central London, someone picking up a coffee there, then we'd be able to again segment that. And this forms quite a strong basis of the work we do in the public sector with destination management organizations who will look at the transaction profile for those visiting from other countries, look at those cross-border corridors, understand how that evolves throughout the year, for instance, kind of looking at that seasonality piece there as well. Now, on the final piece, was we look at the total transaction amount. So whenever that transaction takes place, perhaps that morning coffee, £2.50, £3, £3.50, you know, wherever it is, we'll see that total amount associated with the transaction. And this is kind of one of the you know, the key considerations with our data is that, you know, what we don't see is anything inside the basket. So all we see is that total amount, in case maybe, you know, £3.50 for a coffee. What we wouldn't see, you know, maybe it's a £10 transaction. We wouldn't see, is that a coffee? Was there a croissant? Something was bought at the same time. Anything inside the basket, we won't see. We'll only see that total transaction amount. And that's really the you know, the core metrics that we see when a transaction takes place. But obviously, as you start to layer these together, and as you start to look at you know, and use the scale of our network and the volume of transactions that we see and kind of the breadth of that transaction coverage, it gives us a lot of flexibility to support a really wide variety of use cases. And yeah, Simon, if we just kind of go to the end of the slide here, you know, how then this translates into kind of how our clients use and work with this data. It spans a few different ways, a few different areas. On the left-hand side, and this is how, for instance, we work with the Greater London Authority here in the UK, is we're able to provide really granular, you know, geographically and temporally specific data sets. So, you know, very much providing access to to the underlying data that we see. Now, important point, any data we provide has to be anonymized and aggregated. So we'll never provide any raw transaction level data, but we aggregate it up into the lowest level we can. And this, well, a bit of a heat map here will demonstrate we can provide that data down to that high street level. So there's really granular, geographically based data sets. To kind of step things up a level as well, and again, kind of catering to those with, say, varying levels of familiarity and kind of expertise in working with these, large data sets. We have a number of aggregated reporting and software as a service style analytics platforms where you're not working with as much of the underlying data, but you're focused on maybe your particular policy question, what happened in a particular area when a big event was on, and kind of quickly getting to that insight directly from the platform as well. And then the third, on the right-hand side there is where we'll work with clients more on a bespoke basis. Typically, this is consulting led. And this is where, our partners may be looking for more of an answer to a specific question that they have, and we'll work with that more on a kind of project basis. I mentioned one example on the tourism side. We work quite heavily here, looking at those largest cross-border corridors and understanding the profiles of those that are visiting from that perspective as well. Now, for the competition, it's really on the center and on the left-hand side that we're going to be providing access. So more on the data set side and the platform side, but very much happy to have a conversation around the right-hand side as well, should it be relevant, but those first two for more of the competition. Now, to kind of maybe spark a bit of I suppose discussion, would want to get your thoughts on this as well, but give visibility into the use cases, how some of this can be used. We thought we'd share a few real world data examples, what we can see, and kind of get people's thoughts. So what we have here is an extract of data from one of our platforms that's going to be available through the competition. And what we've pulled is data from the start of this year until around the start of September in Cardiff. Now, as we look at this data, it's moving around, and we're looking at obviously the year-on-year change here. It can be a little bit, what's happening here, what's been happening in Cardiff this year. It can be a little bit hard to ascertain that. But if we just click one forward, Simon, we start to layer in. So before we were looking at total retail, all of our sectors. Now we've looked at restaurant spending. Now something jumps out towards us here at the end of February. We asked an open question when we were presenting this live at the conference. It might be a bit difficult to do on the webinar, so we're going to jump ahead to that. But Simon, if we click to the next slide, what we can see is Wales hosting Ireland in the Six Nations here. So we're looking at that big spike in restaurant spending compared to the year before, kind of 30-40% jump in the spending in restaurants around that particular game day. Now, Simon, if we click one more forward, please. Now it's still that same view, but we've added in hotel spending, so what we call lodging as a sector. We can still see that kind of quite big spike in the end of February, but if we jump towards middle of July, something even bigger jumps out of us there. And Simon, you guys asked the question to Siobhan at the start. She is Swiftie. Those that may be Oasis fans amongst us, that kind of correlates with that. The first, I think 3 days it was of their tour kind of opening up in Cardiff. So over a 60% jump in hotel spending over that weekend when Oasis were in town, which I think shows obviously the magnitude of the economic impact some of these events can have. Now, Simon, if we move to the next step. Next slide, perfect. This particular example, so we're kind of getting a bit more focused here on a particular project, was some outputs, and the report is kind of linked down the bottom. So for some work that we did with some researchers at the University of Liverpool, looking at the economic impact of the city hosting Eurovision in 2023. Now, on the left-hand side, what they started with in terms of their analysis was mapping out the various distances from the Eurovision village in 5-minute increments in terms of walking time. These were the geospatial boundaries that they looked at in terms of their analysis. And then what they did on the right-hand side, just kind of one of the analysis they undertook, was to make a comparison between the level of spending that was seen. So that was our y-axis on the left-hand side there. The higher up on the left-hand side, that's the greater increase in spend versus the walking distance.
Right.
Now, might be a little bit tricky to see. It's kind of quite small here, but in orange is the month prior to the hosting Eurovision, and then in the red, that was the particular weekend where Eurovision was hosted. And what the researchers saw is actually a real peak, a spike in the spending at around that between 10 and 15 minutes from the Eurovision village. There was a big uptick. But interestingly, actually, as you expanded further out, maybe a slight drop compared to the month before in spending kind of a little bit further out, 20, 25 minutes. So thinking about potentially a bit of a pull factor of people kind of coming closer to the Eurovision village site there as well. So starting to again look at what was the economic impact of those businesses local to the event. And I know that these researchers were working with the future hosting organizations, kind of sharing some of the lessons learned about how to make the event even more successful. Now, if we move, Simon, just to the last slide, please. Yeah, perfect. And if you can kind of click forward to the end here, yeah, as well. So another, perhaps even more specific example, I mentioned them before, that the Greater London Authority are I suppose one of our most strategic clients here in the UK. And we pulled some of the data, one of their visualizations here actually from a nighttime economy report that they released in 2025. And on the chart here, we have spending and essentially a year-on-year increase in spending for the area relating to South Bank in London. So this was produced in collaboration with South Bank Business Improvement District. And we have in the grey spending data from 2022 to 2023, and then in the red from 2023 to 2024. And here's where we can start to look at that daytime versus nighttime spending. So we've seen 2022 to 23, or 2022 to 23 to 23, 24. We are seeing a kind of a year-on-year drop, actually. So it's not just that year-on-year impact from kind of coming out of COVID, but actually a decline in spend. And that effect appears to be, the drop of 4%. It's not nothing, but it's relatively small. You might say in that daytime period, but a real drop in that 6 p.m. till 9 a.m. period. So that nighttime economy in and around South Bank shows an even greater drop. So 10 percentage points or more in that nighttime period. Now, this was kind of feeding into the overall report, and obviously a lot of different things kind of being brought up here. But, some of this, as we think about some of the policy impacts, was thinking about how the mayor might want to support the live music industry, relates to some of the events pieces that we were talking about earlier, but also as well on the transport side, thinking about that night 2 provision, how that can support different areas of London. And this is really only one example from the many member organizations that are able to leverage our data via the High Streets Data Service, which is a program that the GLA run. It leverages our data alongside other kind of public data sets as well. One of the us being a kind of founding member of that over the last kind of 4 or 5 years. Now, if we have time, maybe 30 seconds or so, Siobhan.
We've got 30 seconds. I just want to make sure, because we've got one question already, but just to say before you do your final wrap up, both of you, and we go to questions, if anybody does have a question, please send it in now, because we've got a few minutes left afterwards. And when you and Simon have finished, we've got another question in from Phil, so I just want to get that one in as well.
Well, maybe let's just get to the questions from Phil then. Yeah, it would be a shame to miss that. So yeah, go for the question.
Are you sure? And then we'll come back to you. So we can take a couple of minutes extra. But yeah, so Phil, and I think I'm right in saying Phil does data science in health and social care. So really good to get questions in from Phil. Phil has said, how much compute power is available? i.e., what classes of models are feasible? Some of what you've just shown there, Tom, might have gone some way to answer Phil's question. But I guess this, again, if it was one of the shortlisted ideas or the winning ideas, this would be a conversation, I guess, between yourselves and the team, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think how I'd answer that, but you keep me honest, Tom, is that we're not providing in this instance, to make it easy to Phil's question, lots of raw information that will require processing power on the side of the entrant, more are portals. So that, as Tom was showing earlier, you might want to pick particular spend in a area, in a region, different times of day, different merchant categories, pulling drop down boxes to get the data to make that easy for the competition. Actually, rather than giving the analogy I always use, rather than giving the raw ingredients for somebody else to bake the cake, we're giving our portals where the raw ingredients has been baked, and it's actually in there to get access. So there shouldn't be a need for large amounts of processing power.
And Phil has also said, how far back does the time series go? I know you said you've got a long kind of
Yeah,
tail.
2019.
2019. Thanks. Great. I hope that helps, Phil, in terms of your questions. Please do send any other. We've got a couple of minutes we can go. Any other questions, please send them in now. But if not, Simon and Tom, I'm coming back to you for your final slide here.
So, Tom, I interrupted you earlier. Did you want to make one other comment just before I kind of summarize on this slide?
No, I think all good, all good,
Okay,
Simon. I mean,
thanks,
I had maybe just one final comment. I mean,
go for
we
it.
talk about the data itself. Obviously, one of the, I suppose, the powerful aspects of this data is the near real time element of it, and being able to kind of look at what's happening pretty much in the here and now. So just one of the other slides I was just about to kind of jump to in the screen share, a bit of a live demo, was, for instance, looking at what happened in and around the London tube strikes, for instance. So we typically look at a kind of couple of week lag of getting data kind of available and ready to use. So don't feel like you only have to look at things happening back in 2024, for instance. We have data pretty much as of now until around kind of middle of September from this year. So start to look at those near-term effects of kind of what might have been happening out on the ground. So yeah, as you say, back to 2019, and within a kind of 2-week period, we'll have access and available data.
I've just noticed somebody, Siddharth, I think it was, has raised their hand. But Siddharth, the way it's set up on Zoom, could you put your question now in the Q&A? Because we can't come to you, I'm afraid, if you just raise your hand. So if you've got a question, put it in now. And I'm going to hand over to Simon while we wait and see if Siddharth's got the question.
I thought that was a great example, Tom, of showing the real time, as you say, of something that's happened very locally, impacting the economical impact of a tube strike is a lovely example. But I just put this slide back up again, Siobhan, to show those kind of steps. I imagine people already know where to get access to the submission because they've gone to the website to actually sign up to this webinar, but the QR code here or the link goes through to that application page. So I am sorry, Siobhan, we've gone on a little bit longer there, but hopefully useful things. So yeah, any more questions or comments from you or anybody else on the call?
Now, all I would say to everybody on the call, if you do have any other questions once you've mulled this over a little bit, then you can always, as I say, email them to us here at Global Government Forum. We'll make sure they get to the MasterCard team as well. Do scan the QR code that should be on your screen now. And also, having listened to today, if you think any of your colleagues would be interested in this, please do point them towards that website as well. And also, if you have worked in the past with anyone in local authorities or academia or any part of the wider public sector, please have a conversation with them. I think this is a really unique opportunity, doesn't come along often, so please do share it. It's quite a tight timetable, so please do have a conversation with people about this, and we really look forward to receiving some of the ideas about how you think you might be able to use some of this data to help inform your own decision making. I think it's going to be very exciting. So I don't think we have any more questions in for now. Simon and Tom, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, just again to say thank you to you, Siobhan, and Global Governments Forum. Also, as you said, please enter if you feel like you just want to get engaged and see what happens. Siobhan said it, but Tom and I will be here to help and have conversations. So and look forward to those.
Fantastic. And as you said, just finally, the themes were just suggested themes. They might help people think about this, but if you've got any other ideas, Please don't not send it in because you don't think it matches those themes. It can be anything where you think this data would be useful for you. Thank you so
Great.
much, everybody. Anyone who registered, if you weren't able to watch it all today, we'll be sending the link so you'll be able to see the conversation again. And as I say, once you have that link, please share it with any colleagues that you think would be interested as well. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you so much, Tom. I
Thank you,
look forward to
Siobhan.
seeing how this evolves and what ideas
Thank
we
you.
get coming in.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.